Infanta is a term referring to the daughter of a Spanish king, a real-life princess, like Princess Margaret Therese, who at the age of 14 was married to the Holy Roman Emperor Leopold I. But this child bride never really had a chance to grow up because after bearing 7 pregnancies, she died um, in the first 6 years of her marriage. Now, some women do have a chance to grow up, yet, like infantas, they cling to their childhood, entitled little princess status, that Jungian psychologist refers to as puella aeternis, the eternal child. Growing older is inadvertently an aspect of life nobody can avoid, but some people avoid growing up, and other people are prevented from growing up. In the 1950s, the psychologist Eric Berne developed a theory called transactional analysis, and it is a process that focuses on three major ego states: the child, the parent, and the adult. Now, each state has positive and negative effects. For instance, the child can be spontaneity and creativity, but the negative effects is fear or over emotional or excessive guilt. Now, initially, a parent and a child can find themselves in a parent-child transactional mode, as it should be. And then once the child becomes a young adult, then they should move up to being adult to each other. And this transformation process from the child, parent, to the adult often poses problems. Some parents find it very difficult to let go and to acknowledge their children's autonomy. This usually arises out of the parent's need to feel needed, an inferiority-based principle that once the child is no longer there, then the parent will become redundant. So, in order to protect their ego from acknowledging this basic fear of redundancy, the parent does everything in their power to keep the child dependent on the parent. The child, in their natural maturational process, will rebel against this parent trying to keep them in the child ego state. And the more threatened the parent feels, the more they will exert their iron fist and psychological blackmailing, manipulation of controlling the child. And the outcome of this process can be disastrous for both parties, and in some cases, it manifests in murder. In the same way, some children fear growing up, and the puella aeternis, the internal child, who lacks the willingness or the skills to face adult responsibilities, may stunt their own natural growth process by attempting to remain within the child status, and they remain child to their parent. And then through a process of delinquent behavior or imaginary illnesses or financial troubles or drug abuse or unemployment, they force or manipulate the parent to perpetually take care of them by generating guilt feelings in the parent. In the last and final stage of transactional analysis, both of them, from being adult, will then revert to the child becoming a parent role to the parent who is now vulnerable or fragile. Now, the Greek mythology of Electra, the daughter of King Agamemnon, who plotted against her mother with her brothers Orestes, okay, and they killed the mother Clytemnestra because Clytemnestra killed Agamemnon, the father, and Electra just adored her father. Now, this mythological Greek tragedy played out in 2001 when a young South African couple, and they were then dubbed Adam and Eve, because of their minor age status, committed the atrocious murder of matricide. Since they are no longer minors, their identities have been made revealed to us, and they are Alta, Pretorius, and Micki. Alta was 12 when her own father committed suicide. Although he was an alcoholic, she adored him, and she manifested the typical Electra complex. She experienced his death as abandonment, and when her father died, she blamed her mother, and her life was shattered. Alta consoled herself by starting to smoke cannabis, and when her mother found out, she threatened to put Alta into foster care like her older sister. This was another potential abandonment threatening her ego. So in 1998, the mother and the daughter moved to Pretoria, and Alta gave up her cannabis misuse. But then in January 2000, she enrolled in a new school, and she was left to her own devices after school because her mother worked as a nurse. And then she started again with the cannabis use, but also more serious drugs. She used LSD and ecstasy. And then she was a grade 9 pupil at the Hercules Secondary School. And this is where she met her boyfriend, Turnus Frederick Jacobus Stein, who was a grade 11 pupil. Now, Jaco, as he was called, also had a very disrupted childhood. He was the middle of 3 children, and his father left them when he was 3 years old, and for 2 years this family was desperately poor. But by the time he met Alta in secondary school, he'd already been expelled from 3 schools for violence and cannabis use. So this was another match made in erotica, and the teenagers decided to run away from home, but they were apprehended by the police, and then they were admitted to the Tutela Juvenile Institution. In this institution, Alta participated in a Satanistic ritual, which Jaco then observed. And then during April and May 2001, she was referred to Castle Kerry for her drug abuse, and Jaco was referred to the McCullough Rehabilitation Center. But when both of them were released, they found each other again, and they were into each other's arms, and then they both moved in with Alta's mother, called Santi Pretorius. Now, psychological reports later revealed that Santi was very dependent upon her daughter. She objected to a relationship with Jaco, probably because she feared becoming redundant, and she resented losing Alta. So this is a typical example of the parent trying to keep the child in the child mode. Alta at this stage was already 16 years of age, and according to psychological developmental phases, this is the age when children emotionally move away from their nuclear family and they move towards peer relationships and romantic peer relationships. This is natural. Now, sometimes divorced or widowed parents make the mistake of transferring their need for emotional happiness onto the shoulders of their children. On the other hand, immature Paella and Turnus often resent or sabotage their parents from forming romantic liaisons with other adults. On the Saturday, the 7th of July in 2001, Alta and Jaco had been using heroin, and that evening, Santa then threatened to have Jaco evicted and threatened that he could only see Alta on Friday evenings. However, later that night, everybody calmed down, and Jaco and Alta were sitting with Santa on the couch watching TV. And at some stage, Jaco and Alta went to the kitchen where they wanted to be intimate, but as soon as they started, Santa called them, and this irritated the teenagers. They spent the rest of the evening on the couch with Santa watching TV. But Santa fell asleep, and then 2 o'clock in that morning, Alta looked at her boyfriend and she said, "Let's kill her." She then went to the kitchen and she collected knives, and Jaco began stabbing Santa, who woke up and pleaded for her life. And at that stage, Alta also took a knife and she stabbed Santa. And Santa was stabbed 20 times. And then the couple then smoked cannabis, and then they walked out for a walk, came back and made love and went to sleep. So the following morning, they were confronted with a dilemma that many impulsive murderers do not reckon with: what to do with the body. And then their solution was to dismember the body and to flush the body parts down the toilet. And clearly, the orbitofrontal precortex of these 2 teenagers were not very much developed, because they did not think of the long-term consequences of this act. Now, many a plumber can testify to an occupational hazard of clearing sewage and drain pipes of body parts. Stereotypically, then, the teenagers were too lazy to dismember the body, and they came up with another solution. They would move into one of the other bedrooms because the putrid stench of the decomposing body was starting to have an effect on them. They would just ignore the problem until they thought it was going away. Now, Natasha, which was Alta's older sister, called at some time inquiring about her mother, and Alta told her that her mother had left with a man in a red Golf, and she hasn't returned yet. And then Alta knew her uncle would arrive soon enough to look for her mother. So she and Jaco dragged the body of Santa behind the couch where it could not be observed from the window, and they threw a blanket over the blood on the floor. The uncle arrived, but they didn't open the door. In the meantime, then, Natasha was quite worried about her mother, and she alerted the fire brigade and the police. So on the Tuesday morning of the 11th of July, The young couple, Alta and Yaku, left the property and the police arrived at the property. And then they opened the door and they found the stabbed and decomposing body of Santa behind the couch. And the house was in a mess. There was leftover food everywhere, takeaways, etc., and the kitchen was in a mess. But it was clear that somebody then had been living with this body in the house for a few days. And then they found a letter written by Alta and by Yaku in which they actually admit to killing Santa. In the meantime, Alta and Yaku returned, they'd stolen a firearm, saw the police activity at their home, and decided to try and hijack a car. But they were apprehended and arrested. And both of them immediately admitted to the murder. The case was presided before the acting judge, Mrs. Lizette Meyer, and they pleaded guilty to all the charges. Now, both children were then sent to for psychiatric evaluation. And psychologists found that Alta had narcissistic traits. She was manipulative and she was impulsive. Her deep emotional insecurity manifested as aggression. She ignored the mother figure and she experienced abandonment by her mother and her father. She experienced her mother as insensitive to her needs. There were definitely unsatisfied needs of an infantile nature. Yaku, it was obvious that his behavioral problems put a strain on relationship with his mother, and his father was absent during his childhood years. But nevertheless, Yaku developed a hero worship for his father. He did get along with his stepfather, but this man was not able to discipline him. Then Dr. Irma Labiskachny, a well-known criminologist, testified that Alta received no love from her mother. She would be burned by a hot pan if she did not eat her food. And Alta grew tired of her mother's incessant demands of doing her work. So the mother tried to keep Alta into the child role, and the mother herself was behaving very helplessly and childishly. She says, "Since I was a little girl, my mother threatened to give me away, like she did my older sisters. I dreaded this every day." Yaku told Dr. Labiskachny that him and his sister was neglected, and that after school they were abandoned by their mother because she had to work. He said his father left the family to live with another woman, and no one discussed the situation with the children. Dr. Labiskachny said Yaku was a textbook example of somebody exhibiting psychopathic antisocial behavior. Both Dr. Labiskachny as well as the magistrate found that the system had failed Yaku. But by the time she was ready to sentence the pair, she said that they should both receive 21 years imprisonment. And by this time, Eve was no longer in love with her Adam. Alta had to be imprisoned at least for 15 years and to show that she was rehabilitated before she could be released on parole. I believe she's still in prison. Now, similar to this, in last year, 2024, there was the case of the 36-year-old Virginia McCullough in Essex in England, and she was sentenced to 36-year imprisonment for killing both her parents, and astonishingly, she lived with the bodies of her parents for 4 years. In July 1990, she poisoned her father, John McCullough, and he was 70, with prescription medicine, and the next day she beat her mother to death with a hammer, and she stabbed her multiple times. She entombed her father in a rectangular tomb that she built in his study with bricks, and it was covered with blankets and with portraits and paintings. And her mother, she stuffed into a sleeping bag and stuffed her into a cupboard in her bedroom on the top floor of the house. Now, finally alerted by physicians that the elderly couple were missing their appointments, the police finally forcefully entered the property in September 2023, and they discovered the bodies. And apparently, Virginia did not offer any resistance to the arrest. As a matter of fact, she immediately confessed to it, and she told the police, "Cheer up, at least you caught the bad guy." She also pointed out the rusted and blood-covered knife that she killed her mother, and she'd hidden this in a stairwell. Now, since she was unemployed and she had a gambling addiction, Virginia, an adult woman, was living off her parents. She was behaving like a spoiled Infanta. She stole the pensions of her deceased parents. She was a woman refusing to transcend from the child mode to the adult mode, and she manipulated her indulging parents to remain in the parental role. The judge, Mr. Johnson, said Virginia's actions were a gross violations of the trust that should exist between a parent and their children. Virginia McCullough killed for money, and this principle will be explored in a later video on the origin of female serial killers. So if you like our videos, please give us your thumbs up. Please subscribe to our channel. And if you are seriously interested in criminal profiling and forensic psychology, then please join my Patreon channel and please read the articles about the Jungian psychology's takes on the Patricide, equivalent of the Infanta-syndrome, on my website, mickipistorius.co.za. And you can also join my Patreon account by clicking on the QR code. Thank you for watching.